Welcome to Bitter Reality Brewing. It's the top 10 tips, tricks, recommendations, hacks, suggestions, whatever you want to call them. Don't forget, like, subscribe, keep sharing. Definitely appreciate it. Number one, we're going to jump right into it because we're going to do a little sweet and spicy tonight. It's all going to be about sugars and spice. So number one, experimenting with spice or spice combinations, which can also be flavorings with your spices. May sound odd or even gross sometimes, but you might be pleasantly surprised. My best example is a lemon pepper saison. I bought a 6-pack. It was back when Sam Adams did the whole home brewer thing, and you get 2 of each kind of beer, and 2 of them I was dying to try, and the lemon pepper was just kind of in the 6-pack, and I had no choice, and wow, that was the best beer in there. It was amazing. And you know, I'm thinking lemon pepper fish, lemon pepper chicken. Why would I want that in my beer? It was amazing. When I started brewing, that was actually one of the beers I've done as a saison and as a wit. And yeah, definitely a good flavor combination. Number 2, be conservative when using spices in your beer. Very simple. If you don't use enough, it's still gonna be drinkable. If you go overboard, maybe not so much. So you gotta keep that in mind. And yes, I'm doing a little too hard tonight. If anybody's a little curious. Already had my 15 Quake Yeast IPA earlier, so it's all good. Number 3, spiced beer. Especially strong spices in a beer can take time to mellow out. A great example would be my pumpkin ale. If you saw when we did the pumpkin ale, it just didn't quite have enough, so I put a little extra in there. Yeah, some of the cinnamon and a few other spices stood out for a little bit more, and I really wanted it to be kind of even and support the pumpkin. I didn't want any spice to really stand out on its own. So after about 2 weeks, as I've been sipping and that's aging, wow, it mellowed out and it was just perfect. It was the exact goal I had. It just helped the flavors of the pumpkin just kind of stand out, and none of the other spices stood out on their own, which was my goal. So it came out great. And keep in mind, so if you're ever adding something a little strong, just going back to number 2, and you go, ooh, that's a little rough. It's not too rough. Give it a little time, let it age out, and it might actually, you know, kind of mellow out, and that whatever that is you add, it might not stand out quite as much. So, and I've definitely had that happen a few times with different additives or flavorings. Number 4, fresh spices. Yes, when you're picking your spices, don't go into grandma's cupboard and find that spice that she's had there since your mom was a little child. You want fresh spices. Don't get that stuff that's been sitting for who knows how long. The potency's not going to be there. Who knows what else might actually be there that you don't want. So fresh. Always try to get as fresh as you can, because you never know how long it's been, you know, from being wherever it came from to sitting on a shelf at the grocery store or wherever you're buying it from. Number 5. Different places you can add spices, and I'm not saying these are the only places you can add spices, but each has its pro and con, should we say. Spices can be added towards the end of the boil, or right in the middle of the boil, which guarantees that the spice isn't going to introduce an infection because it's going to be added to the boil. Not to mention, keep in mind, if you have a pump, like I just did some spice yesterday in a beer, and I made sure that I kept it with the hops because I didn't want it to clog up the pump. You can add it during the fermentation, which will allow the natural alcohol in your beer to kind of help pull and extract those flavors out. Or if you're going to add it to the very end, to the finished product, I'd recommend doing it as a tincture, where you take the spices, you put it in vodka and let it sit, and probably sit way before you even start making the beer. That way you can add small amounts until you get the flavoring you want and make sure that it's there. And understand too, it may mellow out too when you first add it, or may mellow out to the point that you don't taste it as much too, so you might want to play with it a little bit. Good example is when we add it to a keg. If we don't shake the heck out of that keg and agitate it, that flavor just either stands way out or you can't taste it at all, and you might go overboard. So you want to give it a little time to kind of saturate, or get all absorbed up into the beer. Number 6, and this one's I remember this one very well watching a video, but pre-test your spices. And you're thinking, oh, I pre-test my spices. If you're unsure of how much to use, you could boil it, you could put it in a tincture, liquid, just basically get just something that you can use. And then a good example is Dogfish Head. If you ever saw Sam Cologne, he did a test where he was testing some spices and some flavorings that they were looking to add to some beers. And they used an Allagash White, and he put a little bit in there, spin it around, taste it, trying to figure out just how much he needed based on how many ounces he was adding it to and how many milliliters or whatever he may be adding versus the total gallons, and then he can multiply everything out from there. It really kind of helps you kind of develop those flavors a little bit. And yeah, it might be a little plus or minus when you do the main thing, but it hopefully won't be way over or way under. Test it. Number 7, molasses or treacle. Not real familiar with the treacle, but molasses. Avoid sulfured molasses, that goes without saying. Keep in mind that the darker varieties of molasses contain a much more intense flavor and a lot less fermentable sugars, and may even add a mouthfeel to your beer. A Belgian quad is a great place to use these types of sugars, even a porter, stout, winter ale. You could go outside the line, should we say, and try it in other things, but a little goes a long way, so be careful. Number 8, while we're on the subject of that, using molasses, treacle, or even very dark Belgian sugars. A little goes a long way, and it can really dominate the flavors of your beer, which is what I was kind of hinting to in the other one. So be very careful. You can always, well, I guess you can't always add more because it could restart your fermentation, but in theory, you probably could add a little bit more if you were adding it to something that's kegged and chilled down. But, you know, just, you can always rebrew it and go a little heavier next time, unless you're one of those people who likes to dive in the deep end and hope for the best. I do that from time to time, and most of the time I don't regret it, but every now and then I do. So it's something you can consider too. 9, Belgian Candi Syrups. These are quick, easy ways to add a lot of ABV and to dry out your beer with highly fermentable sugars. But with the darker syrups, because yeah, some of the lighter ones, when you add them, you're just not even gonna know you added them. It's just basically gonna be a higher ABV and much drier. But some of these can impart a lot of flavors into your beer, especially the darker Belgian candies. Coffee, chocolate, toffee, toasted bread, vanilla, rich caramel, dark fruits like plum and raisins, or even a little bit of dark cherry. These are things you need to be aware of, and maybe that's what you want. Usually when I'm using the darker Belgian sugars, that's really what I want, that deep, dark, rich fruit added to there, knowing I'm gonna get some coffee, maybe toffee and caramel type flavors, which I'm okay with. So based on the syrups and what you're adding them to, and keep in mind, you know, the lighter ones are things like blonde ales, or blonde ale that became a golden strong. Darker syrups are usually used in Belgian dark ale, or dark strong ale, sorry, Dubels, and of course Belgian quads. So just something to think of. And the Dubel, a lot of times you don't even need to add it to the Dubel, and you're still going to get that nice richness if you're adding the right types of malts. Number 10, flavored candi syrups. Yes, flavored candi syrups. And no, this isn't a sponsored ad or anything. It's just somebody I've used their products. Jim over at Cascade Beer Candi Company. That's what we used here. We used 2 of the raspberries, and then we even added a little bit of raspberry flavoring just to see how much more we could push the envelope without going a little too crazy. But it's a great way to impart extra flavors into your beer, and a little bit gives you the nice little nuances and on the nose kind of hint. But of course you could double up and get a little bit more of that flavoring, a little bit more of the ABV, a little drier on the beer. But a good example, toasted coconut, which is actually what this is right here. You got toasted coconut, candi syrup, chai spices, maple smoked bacon. And that's one I keep considering for like a porter or maybe a stout, but maple smoked bacon, just, yeah, it's the different part that sounds good to me. Toasted hemp, Southwest chipotle. Yeah, I know you're thinking, what? There's like a chai ginger or something to that effect. And the more traditional, you have your wit candy with your coriander, orange peel, and there's many, many others I can not even think of off the top of my head. And I'll put a link down below for anything I mentioned in here, even though really all of this is stuff that, you know, you're gonna have to go look for, whether it's on Amazon or your local grocery store, or at a specialty spice store, you might even be able to order it. So, but Cascade Beer Candi is definitely a great source for the candi syrups if you don't wanna make your own, or there's not something local that you're looking for. And he has probably the largest variety I've ever seen, and you've seen us use quite a few different ones here. And that's it. Thank you for joining us, Bitter Reality Brewing tonight, and don't forget to like, subscribe, share. It's always appreciated. Thank you again.